Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, and me, Greg the Single Guy. We are recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you join us. I think you should start us off. We can have fun talking. We haven't done a podcast like this.
You know what? We have not. We're sitting around in the living room.
This is a living room podcast.
This is a living room. We're not online. We're not on the cloud. We're beaming straight into the heads of the ITP crowd. We're beaming straight to you.
I love it. Or do I get to start us off this time? You've been starting us off.
No, I'm starting us off. It's my interview.
Okay.
It's my interview. I'm the one asking the question. I'm the one driving here. Listen, ITP crowd, we are so fortunate that we get to talk firsthand with Greg the Single Guy about recruiting. He recently went to the Search Fair in Washington, D.C., and he's here in the Cat Guy's living room telling us all about his experience on the recruiting fair. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to turn this over to Greg the Single Guy.
Well, first of all, Ken, it's great to be here in your apartment. I'd like to share a few of my stories and experiences from the ISS, not the Search Fair.
Oh, it wasn't Search, it was ISS. Yes, my mistake.
That's right. That's okay. It's one of the big three in the States, besides the Canadian one up there in, the Queen's Fair, Kingston, Ontario. But I was in Washington, D.C., and it was the first time they've done Washington, D.C. Usually ISS is on either coast, and usually it's down in Atlanta, or Boston, and on the East Coast, and then they go over to the West Coast, usually do San Francisco. But this is the first fair, and we have to keep this in mind. This is the very first fair that they had face-to-face. They did not even have the one in Bangkok this year face-to-face. So this is the first face-to-face job fair after COVID.
Wow, that's amazing. Did ISS do a West Coast fair this year?
No, they did not. And I think they did an Atlanta fair earlier this year, but I did not hear much about it. I was under the impression they didn't even do an Atlanta fair, but somebody else mentioned it. I know that they did a couple fairs.
So will the fairs be coming back? Will some of them stay virtual, or do you expect from here on forward most of the fairs coming back?
Well, according to my crystal ball, I think it's going to be face-to-face going forward. And every one of the face-to-face fairs is going to have that part of it that is actually still video. Because, and as I'll tell you a little bit later, even though I interviewed face-to-face, I was still doing video interviews as part of the scenario for many of the schools, right? And not to mention, the other thing is that my crystal ball is based also on the UNI fair that happened the weekend before this fair. So the weekend before the ISS, they had the UNI fair in Iowa, and then they had a leadership conference for ISS with all of the heads of school at the Washington, D.C. hotel in between the two weekends, and then they had the recruitment fair. So the head recruiters could have gone to UNI, flown up to D.C., taken part in the leadership conference, which is like a big professional development for leadership for international schools through ISS, and then stayed at the hotel for another couple days and done the recruiting fair.
So for our listeners, they know that you have an extensive background in international education. What did it take for you to prepare for the fair? Obviously, you needed to, I'm guessing, re-sign up for ISS. What did you need to get new references, fill out new applications? What was that like preparing for the fair?
Oh, that's a good question. The last job fair I went to was 7 years ago.
Right.
Kent. 7 years ago was the last time in the game. What I did was earlier in the year, you're one of the ones that was like, oh my God, I can't believe you just did that. But earlier in the year, remember about October, I went up to my superintendent and said, hey, I'm looking at a job fair this year. He's like, what? And I can't believe you're telling me this, but I said, hey, I want transparency here. So I went up to each one of my bosses. I have a tech boss, I have my head of school, and I have my principal. I said to each one of them, I'm going in February for that ISS job fair just to look around and see what's there. And my superintendent actually told me that I have some job security. He was like, hey, listen, I don't want you to go. And it's funny to say, but even since back then, I've had references from all three of these guys, And the cool thing was, I was always joking about it. My tech director, I won't mention his name, but my tech director, I love him. He's like, we're going to say lots of bad stuff when somebody calls for a reference. Like, we're going to keep you, Greg. So, yeah, I guess the point of that is that I've gone into this job fair. This is my 7th job fair, but I went into it like none other because I have the job security of a job that I absolutely love. And I just wanted to see what else is out there, see if I could get some other schools interested, see what value I have.
So you fill out the application, you pay the money. What do you pay now for a fair?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question. Yeah, I did have to prep for it like any other time. I had to re-up for ISS, meaning I had to pay I think it was 150 to be a part of ISS. Maybe it's not. I
Now
can't
you pay
remember.
the 150 for them to reactivate your file, or is that the fee that you pay to get into the fair?
Honestly, I don't remember, Kent. They might have waived it. You and I, the fair the weekend before, they had wiped out their attendance fee. Right? They're trying to get more people attracted. I think ISS did too. It might have been an open season, I guess you could call it open season. But no matter what, if there's a job fair, you do have to prep by paying for the service. Historically, it's been 1 or 2 fairs you could attend, as well as all their fairs. You get into their database and you get your resume up there. So I did that earlier, much earlier in the year. Paid my fee, I got onto the database, I filled out all of my resume. I had to update my resume they had on file already, since I'm a returning recruit. And I had to make sure that the top of the list of my references were my current references. So I had the 3 references from my current school, and I do have remaining references from the past, so I had to update 1 or 2 of my former references from other schools.
Now, remind me, are the references confidential? Like you don't get to see them, or do your recommenders just hand them to you and you upload them?
Well, that's another good question, Kent. You're really good at this.
Hey.
Hey, the UNI fair and the ISS fair are the 2 that I've gone back and forth with over the years. I can speak now currently for ISS. It's just you have them send in a reference for you and you don't really see it, so it's confidential. I usually go up and ask my references for a copy of their reference, just in case, because I usually have a good relationship enough that I can ask them that. And if they type it into something, I say, type it in Word first, paste it into the ISS, whatever their system is that you need to put it into, and I will keep a written copy if you allow me to. And they did. And then I just updated their telephone numbers and stuff. And right before the fair, I made sure that they all knew I was going. I reminded them, busy time of the year. I said, hey, I'm going this weekend. I need to have a cell phone just in case. If you agree, I need a cell phone or a way to get in touch with you over the weekend because that's when the fair is going on. So they did agree to that.
Sometimes they're going to call your references right from the fair, too. I bet some
Oh, absolutely. They all did.
Yeah, so they must have got a few phone calls, people asking about you.
So the week before the fair is a very popular time also for schools that are targeting certain candidates. They will call ahead during the school week as other references might be working during school hours. So I had already arranged for that and made sure that they had the school numbers for the references. And then I got the cell phone numbers for when I was at the fair for the weekend. But most of the people had already called ahead, and I was getting jokes from my references about, oh yeah, you're looking at Guatemala, or you're looking at Costa Rica, or you're looking at China. And I'm like, oh, so they called. And throughout the week, I was getting feedback from my references as I saw them jokingly in the hallways, like, oh, Greg, are you leaving us for Costa Rica?
I think it's pretty funny that schools that maybe you hadn't even talked to are calling your bosses and inquiring about you.
Those people that are out there that are maybe going to their first fair, they need to be aware that those phone calls are being made before the fair, actually. So as well as it's very important that your references know that that's going on the week before the fair and during that weekend.
So let's get to, you're flying into DC. Do we need to talk any more about pre-fair stuff, or should we go move along to the fair?
There are more and more schools that are hiring and interviewing before the fair, and then when you get to the fair, they do a final interview, right? So they might do a face-to-face just to cement the deal and get a feel for you in person, but they've already maybe interviewed you twice or three times with people from, like, with a different principal or another curriculum director or the head of school the week before or 2 weeks before. So that is part of the preparation, and they might have some interviews well ahead of the fair.
And that's how the process, that's why fairs move quick.
And that's why
You've
it's
got to be
changing so much.
ready to sometimes sign on the dotted line before you leave the fair.
Correct, Ken. And that's the other reason that I went well ahead of time, even in October, to get my references uploaded, to let them know I was looking, and to get them in order, ready to go, knowing that I was possibly leaving at the end of the year.
Did you take your suit with you, suit and tie?
Oh, I was dressed to the nines. I got to the hotel and I had to actually make sure that I had a nice laundry bill because I had to have everything dry cleaned, get all the wrinkles out after it was stuffed in a suitcase. After, 5 or 6 guys jumped up and down on my suitcases between airplanes, of course. So the suit was all wrinkled. The shirts are all wrinkled. The part of getting there, you get to the hotel, you immediately call up the laundry service and have that done for a nice hefty fee. But it's all part of the job fair for me.
Well, and you can always tell the veterans from the newbies at the fair. The newbies usually have a roommate or two in the hotel, I imagine.
Well, you used to do that a lot, where you'd arrange for it ahead of time to have a roommate and share the burden of the cost. The other thing is, man, if you're not really well funded, you don't have a lot of money to spend, just run that shower for about 45 minutes with all your clothes hanging up in the bathroom. That's what I certainly did that with half of my clothes, cut down on my laundry bill.
So this was the first fair. We're back in person now. So the recruiters, they're a little rusty getting on the road again. The candidates, maybe a whole couple years of candidates who had not been going to fairs. Give us just the 5,000 feet up view of this fair now. So you get there, what's this fair looking like?
You check in the fair the day before, hopefully. And if you do that, you can get a run of the land. So immediately when you walk into that big hotels where they're actually hosted, and generally there are already recruiters there. You don't know if you're going to be in the elevator or the restaurant or breakfast, at the front desk, maybe standing in line in the elevator with all of these heads of school and hopefully other candidates. This year, the 5,000-foot bird's eye view of this fair was the most astounding ever, because when I got there, even the first day of the fair, there were no candidates. It was less than 200. And usually there's 600 to 800, maybe even 900 candidates.
Okay, so let me repeat that. That seemed a pretty big deal. Usually you would expect 650, 700, 800 candidates converging on this hotel, and you show up and it looks like maybe about 200. Do I understand you correctly?
You're expecting to go to a Pink Floyd concert, and all of a sudden it's a piano recital. It was crazy.
So that leaves the question, where are the candidates? What did you...
Oh, I'm asking out there right now. I'm still asking myself that. Where were all the candidates? When I walked in and I checked in with the ISS team down in the basements, the big conference center of the hotel's in the basement, and I went up to their table and signed in, said, I'm here, and they gave me a name tag and made sure I was, logged into the app and everything, and I saw all of these name tags on the table. But the next day, after the fair started, there's all these name tags. There's hundreds of name tags still on the table waiting.
So it seems to me as if some people had planned to show up, but just didn't make it, perhaps?
Absolutely. I mean, you could see that the ISS recruiting team was having meetings about this. Like, what are we going to do next, Where are all the people? 5 of us sat around in the candidate lounge, because they have a lounge for the recruiters and a lounge for the candidates with tables set up and everything, and coffee and beverages. So we sat around in the candidate lounge, and I think 2 of the people I can mention right off the bat just by first name. One is Tara, and she was the first one in there. I was second, bright and early that day when everything's starting in the evening, or the day before actually. We walked in and she was already there, and I sat down with her, started a great conversation. Awesome candidate, awesome person, right? Then I also met about 4 or 5 other people, and it was just great to sit down and talk. Most of them were new to this, right?
So a lot of them, the 4, 5, or 6 that you started bonding with,
Were newbies.
were
Yeah.
experienced domestic U.S. teachers
Right.
looking to go to their first overseas job.
Take that giant leap and, Yeah, they had
That's
gotten
great.
there early. It was really
That's
great.
great.
Yeah,
Well,
and immediately I started helping them out with questions and how the fair works and
what
stuff like
kind
that.
of questions does someone ask you? You've been to a few of these fairs. You've been around the block a few times. What is it that they're curious about?
At the beginning of the fair, it's not specifically about where to go or what it's like to be in certain countries. A lot of it is just the format of the fair, right?
Okay.
Like I just sort of set my book on the table, just sort of not saying anything, because my book's about job fairs. So I put Finding the Right Fit.
Finding the right fit, www.amazon.com, or wherever you buy your finer books.
Thank you for that shameless plug again. Always, always. But that book means so much to me because this is what I do. You know, this is the 1 year anniversary of my book too.
Oh,
So
hey,
I put
happy
it
anniversary.
down. Thank you. Yeah. So I think I sold my mom a copy. Anyway,
Should we be reading passages for the
Right.
listeners
On
to
page
celebrate
35.
the 1 year?
I'll just read chapter 3 for you right now. No. I guess my point is I just sort of silently put it on there or kept it on my book bag and hoping that people would notice. But throughout the fair, I did that. It was sort of fun. And it came up once in a while. I think maybe I sold a couple books because of this. But
Fantastic.
that wasn't the point. The question that you gave me was, what are the questions that they asked me? A lot of it was the format of the fair.
Yep.
Like, what's going to happen in the next couple days? They're all excited. They're waiting for people to show up. They're like, when are they going to show up, Greg? And what do we do next? And what's this presentation like? Do I have to go to the presentations or, things like that? And I'll tell you right off the bat, besides the fact there were only 200 candidates at this job fair, the other big slap in the face, I can't believe it change, which of course as a techie I should have expected this, but there's no paper. It's all done with this app called Whova. So a week before the fair started, we all got a message via email saying, download this app for the convention. It was our way of communication. So in the past, I'll give you an example. In the book specifically, I go through a step-by-step how the job fair works. And part of it is to go and check your mailbox every couple minutes from the very moment you step in there and get your pamphlet to the moment before you leave the fair. Now, the mailbox, meaning they have usually a small room with hanging folders, alphabetical by last name, and I usually had a mailbox that was like hanging folder by L.
Yep.
And yours would be the A's, right? So Kent Aramura, I want to leave you a message. I could drop it in your hanging folder.
I also go under C
Right.
for cat
A little,
guy.
right, cat guy too. And I could just leave you a note. If you're a recruiter, they have the schools in the recruiter mailboxes. They had all the schools listed by country alphabetical and then by school name alphabetical within that letter. So if it was if it was in Egypt, then I could go to the school in Egypt, go by alphabetical in the E's and find the Egyptian school. Leave them a message or drop off my resume. But now it's all completely digital.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this. All of those scraps of paper that used to exchange hands at the previous fairs, that's been done away with.
Invitations from schools, thank you letters, interest letters, a letter of intent, a cover letter, your CD-ROM, whatever you want to drop. People have dropped so many things. I mean, I used to see people go up to the hanging files for schools and drop the resume in every single hanging folder in that case. The shotgun effect.
I used to put a whole turkey in there, but that's just me.
And some people come along and put turkeys in there, okay? But that's gone. I mean, it was
Wow.
it was stunning because it was a major part of job fairs for years.
Yes.
And of course, I've been away for 7 years, and I published my book a year ago, and I should have done the research recently about what job fairs are doing, but it was still during COVID, right? I couldn't go back.
Listeners, Volume 2 on its way soon. Keep your eyes open.
I don't know if it'll be volume 2, but it'll probably be edition 2.
Edition 2.
Right? Or I'll just add a little blip in there in the beginning. I don't know. It's a long-awaited thing, right?
Well, listen.
I missed it though, Kent. When I arrived, I had all these Amazon boxes waiting for me at their shipment desk. One of them was just thank you notes, thank you cards with envelopes to give to schools for after the
You brought
interview.
the scraps of paper.
Of
yes.
course, everybody in the past, you wanted to prepare yourself. You have sticky notes.
Yes.
You have paper lists, you have a pamphlet that's given to you when you arrive, you have a map of the whole place, you have, your thank you notes, you have copies of your resume. I don't think I gave one copy of my paper resume out at all because everything's on that app.
On the app. Okay. Well,
And it's linked to your profile.
I feel like this is breaking news for the ITP crowd out there, getting a look at the job fair of the future.
Well, it is for my mom who bought the one copy of my book. So I'll have to make sure that she knows there's been some changes in the book.
Also, by the time we put out the second edition, it'll be job hunting for those near 60 years old.
Oh my God, I'll have to definitely add some. Oh, we can't. We don't even have to get into age yet, do we?
Well,
That's another part.
Is this a good time to talk about the school side of things? What schools, you talked about that there were fewer candidates than expected. Is this a good time for us to talk about the schools that showed up?
Yeah, I can give you a little bit of a rundown of the schools that showed up because it is interesting. They'll post on their website for ISS which schools are attending the job fair itself. So you have a database of schools. You can look at all of them and who's showing up, what their website is, all the links to their package, what they're offering, possibly what they're offering for a salary. It's like their diagnostic page, right? Their profile page has housing on there and basics about air flights and whether or not you can bring a spouse or support a spouse, non-working spouse. All of that information's on there, but you're back to your point of which schools were there. Not all the schools that were listed actually showed up. So throughout the fair, they had a list of crossed out names of just schools that just didn't bother to show up. They didn't have a listing of those for the candidates that I'm aware of for the schools, so in reverse. But I do know that the listing of schools went up that were not showing up.
So there was a
Like
list
Russia
of schools
didn't show up.
that they expected
Yes.
over the course of the fair, but then they would cross them out when they confirmed that those schools weren't coming.
Once the fair started,
Once
because
the
they
fair
confirmed
started.
that they were going to be coming to the fair, and for some reason they just changed. Maybe they filled all the positions, right? Maybe at the last minute they held interviews and the head of school said, that's it. We don't have enough positions open to go and pay for a job fair. Let's cancel it. We'll eat the cost of whatever reservations we had and we'll just not send anybody. And that's happened. So, for example, like there was a school in Russia, not the Anglo-American school, but a different one that did not show up. There were schools from South America that did not show up. Only a few showed up. I would say about 50 schools were there, and there were probably, I don't know, I would guess at least 65 schools that had signed up. So maybe 15 schools didn't even show up.
So,
Well, if it was one of my number one schools that didn't show up, which I didn't have a number one this year.
that's right.
Right?
You were just
But I was just,
checking it
I'm
out.
at my number one right now. I was
Yep.
checking it out, but when we arrived and you see, if it was your number one school, it'd be really depressing because here they had said they're going to be there. Maybe they filled the position and you had already invested and flown there and stayed at the hotel and put all this money into it. And wow, that would be really depressing. That's happened in the past to me, where you have to change your whole ball game because number one didn't even show up.
And that's why we go back to you got to be light on your feet at these fairs, expect the unexpected, and keep your eyes open and keep your heart and mind open.
So you prepare for it, and we went back to that, how do you prepare for the job fair? Well, you do a lot of homework beforehand. You go onto that ISS Fair site and look at all the schools that are planning on showing up, that are committed, and that running list. Once you get there, there's nothing you can do about it, but you've already researched and looked at the schools that you want to go to and interview with. If they don't have the position once they get there, if it's filled, or perhaps they don't even show up, then you have to be adaptable and go with the jobs that are there at the fair, which is a very good point, Kent. And you and I have both been in this for quite a while, and one of the most important pieces of advice from teachers overseas, they're seasoned. Do you know what that piece of advice is about a job fair?
Is it to stay open?
Open-minded?
Stay open-minded?
Right. Those little schools. Like if Yemen was there, why pass up something just because of the news or because of what somebody else said? You don't really know maybe where that country is. I'll give you an example. There was a school from Moldova that was on the list. I went into a meeting with QSI and I had to actually cram a little bit with Google Maps. I had to go and find where these schools were. I didn't know the countries, right? I did not know where Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Moldova. I did not know that Moldova is between Ukraine and Romania. Did you know that?
No, I don't. I don't believe I
It's
did.
a
I think
tiny little
Mrs.
country.
Cat Guy knows those things. She's the geographer of the family.
Right. Well, these are all things. I guess my point with that is that the schools that didn't show up create sort of this idea that, and remind you as a candidate that you can't just focus on schools you know about, but to actually explore the world and try out some of the ones that you would never think of, maybe don't even know on the map.
So, 50 schools, 200 candidates. Are there jobs for the candidates? Are the schools there just talking to themselves, or are they pulling in those candidates, talking to those candidates? Are they offering them jobs? What did it seem like to you?
Well, I have some great stories. I met a beautiful woman named Aura, and I hope I said her name correct. She was from the Grand Cayman School, the Grand Cayman International School. And the reason I bring up her name right away is because I called her superstar throughout the entire fair. Now,
she now has a restraining order against you, but that's another issue. We'll talk about that when we get to police stories.
Right. She's trying to get as far away as possible, man. No, she probably looked at the list of schools and said, I want to get as far away from this new guy, Greg, as I can. Well, the reason I called her superstar is the first day of the fair, the day before the fair, she was hired. For a school, she's going to a school in Vietnam. It was her number one pick for this job fair. They did show up at the fair and interview her. The cool thing was that she got hired the day before and quietly just let people know. She did not, maybe it was the morning of the first day of the fair, but she was hired right away, right?
That's
before
the
anybody
best.
even interviewed, she had done.
You're on vacation at that point. You got a hotel room. You got a plane ticket. You got a job. That's the best.
She did 3 or 4 interviews before the job fair, and then they offered it to her when she was there, and she was beaming from ear to ear, just like,
That's
wow,
right.
wow, amazing. And the greatest thing was that, and she's never even read my book, but I mentioned it in my book to be the quiet hero, right?
That's right. Yes, you don't want to celebrate, right?
So many people want to
right.
celebrate, and that one year I went to a job fair, and I call it the quiet hero because one year, years past, this guy comes running into the candidate lounge going, yes, I got it! And the woman right next to me was going for the same position, waiting to hear back from the school, and just found out the way.
And that's how she found out.
Aura, she showed up and she was quiet about it.
Yep.
She just sort of like mentioned it to a few of us, right?
Yep.
The small group, the small power table that met the day before, we sort of kept tabs on each other. And so she had her job right away. I remember right before the round robin sign up, when you go out to the tables and sign up to interview with the schools, she was actually at the roundup. She's like, I don't feel comfortable here. And I said, well, this had happened to me the last job fair.
Yep.
I got this current job the night before any of the fair started. So I never went to the round robin because I didn't want to take up time. And I shared this idea with her and she agreed. So she showed up a little bit later and hung out in the candidate lounge for the next couple of days and had lunch and dinner, and we shared experiences and stuff, but she was quiet about it and celebrating like, wow, like inside going, yeah, baby. And I called her the superhero the whole time.
So Aura, if you're out there and
congratulations.
Congratulations, and if Greg, the single guy, is allowed to speak to you, give the ITP a ring and let us know how your year in Vietnam is going. We have a friend of the ITP.
It's not going yet.
We have a friend of ITP.
She's still in Grand Cayman.
Right. We have a friend of ITP in Vietnam. You'll remember Brantley.
That's right.
Is in Vietnam, so maybe Aura and Brantley will get to know each other.
That's right. We'll set her up with Brantley for a future.
Because Brantley can show her the ropes in Vietnam, and we can maybe follow up with Aura in the future next year and see how it's going. You know, we've had people follow up with us, talk about their years. They followed the podcast. They give us an email or a phone call, and we follow up with them.
Well, we're certainly going to hear from Schaefer again. We need to hear how he's doing with his recruiting.
Oh,
and
yes.
I do want to hear back from several of our podcast interviews have got to, update us on what's going on. We'll take a moment's break now to remind you how to reach out to us. Of course, you can address any negative comments to Kent, the cat guy. We do love to hear from you. If you're out on Facebook, we don't do that, but our handle on both Instagram and Twitter are at ITPExpats with an S, ITPEXPATS. As a handle, if you want to, you can send us an old email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit us at our new website at www.itpexpat.com. www.itpexpat.com. Well, back to the show.
So the ITP crowd would love to hear your personal experience. What schools you talked to, what decisions did you make, and where do you stand now?
I went into the fair and got several interviews for the first day. So I interviewed with Marrakesh. I actually set up a first interview with Carol Morgan's school in Dominican Republic.
Wow.
And we have a lot of connections with Dominican Republic through people that we work with here.
Yes, we do.
And Carol Morgan. I said hello to the recruiter for the school in Lincoln. The head of school in Lincoln is there, and we have a colleague, one of my best friends here is going down there with her family to Lincoln next year, so I dropped in on them and said hello. I didn't interview with them. So I started with Marrakesh, and I had an interview with a big conglomerate called Bazis, and they're based out of China. I think it's about 9 different schools in China. So they had a recruiting team there. And what else is on the plate? QSI was, like I mentioned, QSI is another one that I interviewed with. Funniest thing was I interviewed with an online school for ISS. And the online school is interesting because it's an ISS pilot. There's only 3 students this year that the pilot has, and the director of this online school is based out of Aruba. So she and one other teacher have students now, and they have 14 lined up for next year, hopefully up to 20, and they're going to go for 30 or 60 in the next couple of years if ISS continues with them. So she directly, right out of the gate, she wanted to interview with me. So before the recruiting even started, she pulled me aside and we talked for about an hour and a half maybe less. And it was interesting because I've always thought about online teaching, and I'm a real geek, so she wanted to hear what I had to say. We agreed that I would go to the recruiting and go around and check in with other schools and get back to her. So sort of back and forth the whole time, I was checking in with her to see where I fit into the scheme of things with her online idea. And later I did a second interview with them. But Kent, I think so far it was online, Marrakesh, the Bazis schools in China, the Carol Morgan school, 3 or 4 others I had looked at too. I think I was, at the end I had Japan, was not there, but I had a video interview with them.
Yes.
And I was a little bit more busy than I can remember. I'm drawing a blank on the other schools. So that doesn't really matter that much. I had a lot of first interviews, probably about 10 in total for first interviews.
So I think what you're telling the ITP crowd is that you got to talk to a lot of schools, you got to know people, and if you really, really, really needed to find a new job, several of these schools would have been options for you.
Well, I did get offers from several of them. I was just sort of going through the process. So just for the main goal of any job fair is you want to get interviews. You want a lot of interviews, as many as you can, not only for the practice, but to actually reach out and make some connections. So later on down the line, if I interview with a school, they might not choose me or have an offering for me or even give me a second interview, but maybe that's because of their puzzle pieces aren't working out, right? They might have their eye on another candidate, but they'll keep me in mind for the future. So I tried to get as many interviews as possible, and most of them this is the problem for me, was that most of them were not for tech.
Well, that was what my next question. You know, we probably have many people in our audience who are tech people or would like to be tech people in a school. And you said earlier that you were surprised, even the veteran teacher that you are was caught off guard by just how few tech jobs were needed at this fair. Where did all the tech jobs go?
I don't know. I think they all work at Best Buy now or something. I swear. I don't know if there is tech going on at schools anymore. I mean, the hardest thing is to define tech anyway, right? On my resume, I'm ready for pretty much anything tech, especially elementary educational technology, right? So I can do that. I can do a tech director job at a smaller school. And then just to round things off, I also am first and foremost a teacher for homeroom, for elementary, like you do.
Well, that's where you started. We were homeroom teachers together, and then during our time together, you switched over to your passion and your background into the tech makerspace laboratory.
Right. So with ISS, I logged in, and on my resume, it was specifically targeting tech. I mean, everything on my resume screams technology. But surprisingly, there were very few tech jobs that were being offered or even reached out to me to give me an invitation. So once again, remember, we don't have those paper invitations to
Yep.
go and sign up. In the round robin, we used to have the pink slip like type of invitation. If I got one of those, I could jump the line of hundreds of people and sign up for a time. Now, we didn't have those interviews, so it was a different kind of fair, and perhaps there was some kind of miscommunication or no communication. Maybe they were waiting for me to show interest in the school because without an invitation, I didn't necessarily go to some of the schools that might have had tech. There were a few other schools that had tech offered, but they didn't really strike my fancy, and I never heard from them to even start a conversation. It made me start wondering, am I worth something, right?
Well,
You do go
it's
through these
hard.
doubts. It's a roller
It's a
coaster of
roller
emotion.
coaster ride, and you've been around the block a few times, and if it can happen to you, it can happen to anybody in terms of just those up and down feelings you experience over the course of the fair.
Well, imagine you start off on this brand new social platform for specifically for the fair, and you're waiting for what is basically an invitation or a reach out from the school showing interest, and your phone's not ringing. Your your social media, there's no following, there's no likes, there's no hey Greg, we're interested. There's very few of those for somebody that's higher up the food chain. I don't know. I'll tell you one thing that's interesting though too is that somebody said, and I will mention this because you've reached out with your podcast a little bit more, but working at our school, it's well known for its package and
Yep.
for its salary. So I sat down, no kidding, I sat down with one school, I won't tell you which one. The first thing out of the recruiter's mouth, and this is the first interview, the quick 30-minute interviews, the first thing out of his mouth was, Greg, I can't offer you that kind of salary that you have right now. And I just sort of giggled, looked at him, and I said, I honestly, I didn't sit down here with you thinking that you would even come close to it. I said, I'm looking for a balance rather than a paycheck. So,
But it's there because if I'm a recruiter and you sit down in front of me, and I know for a fact that in March and April, you're going to make more money at your current school than most teachers make for an entire year. That's what I have to lead off with. It's like, Greg, we're just not going to be able to hit your salary expectations. I mean, that's got to be rough on a recruiter.
most of our listeners will never experience that until they have reached a school that is giving them a package which is well above the average, right?
Yep.
So I'm going into this job fair with the idea that maybe I will leave a high salary position. Now, that gives me pause because perhaps the reason some schools didn't even reach out to me to initiate anything, perhaps it was because they didn't expect me to even be interested because of the salary they're offering. It's a genuine question I've never experienced before. Or is it, am I too high up in experience to even offer something? That they maybe question or doubt that I would even be interested
Well,
with
let
them?
me ask you this because we're not the only 50-ish
I'm 25.
year
I don't know
old
what you're talking
guys
about.
out on the international job market. Are the 50 to 60-year-old teachers, are they being hired? Is it a little bit more challenging for that 50 to 60 range than it is for that 30 to 40 range? What's your impression?
Well, as I round that corner a little bit after 25, right?
Double that and then add some.
Now, I think those of us that are in our early 50s that were there definitely are in a different ball game. Okay, we're looking at schools that will accept past 55. We are looking at schools that might have a 60 I shouldn't even say schools. It's the governments of the countries that these schools are in, usually that set the bar of how high an age bracket they can employ.
So some countries might say no visas offered after 55 years old, or
Correct.
60 or 65.
Correct. And the tricky part of this is, and without a conversation you may not know, without talking to somebody at the schools in those countries or the recruiters there during interviews, you may not know where their level sits, because they might not be able to hire you if you are 53, like I am, a 53 and a half, if their cutoff is at 55. They might stop hiring somebody that's at 52. So they have a 3-year contract, right? So they have a little wiggle room there, right there. The Russian school that was supposed to be there, it was in Kazan or something like that. I think it was a government school. It's not the Anglo-American school like I mentioned before, but they had a cutoff of 50, which I don't understand how they get teachers then, right? I mean, wow. I never felt so old in my life when I read that on their profile. It's really when your age comes up that you're looking at these schools and you say, well, their cutoff is 55 and I'm 53 and a half. So they're probably not even going to look at me. And that takes a lot of legwork to look at schools. So therefore, in your research, part of your homework, part of your scurrying through this roller coaster of emotions of which school to interview with and who to talk to, you have to really bring up the age thing when you get to be in your 50s.
Did some of the teachers that you bonded with, did anyone walk away with a job other than the
Other
nice
than Aura,
lady who's
yeah.
got the restraining order that she got the job? Did others quietly celebrate that you talked to?
Actually, yes. And in fact, the woman, the first person that I talked to,
Yes.
right, Tara, she went away with her number one. And she had looked at me that first day and said, I
Congratulations,
am
Tara.
leaving here. I am leaving here with a job, and I'm leaving here with the one I want. And it was fantastic. I really congratulate her too. There were a lot of hires that were there. And I tell you one thing that's
So
surprising.
the jobs were there. People were being
Yes.
offered jobs at this fair.
People were being
Yes.
offered jobs right away. Others felt like they were waiting around. And there were a couple of us older guys, the older crowd, we were waiting around. One or two candidates from they're teaching in the States now. One was from New York, and he was waiting around like I was, patiently and just wondering if somebody would bite, right? He wanted to go overseas and test it out, and had been teaching here in the States a long time. And I don't know if he landed a position towards the end or not. I definitely hope that he'll get one soon, because the recruiting season is not done until schools start.
I didn't get this job until, I don't think, March or April. I was a
Right.
little bit later in the season for here. Most of my coworkers were hired in January, February. I think they discovered they needed one more person 10 years ago, and that's when I came on board here.
I met a teaching couple that the husband is 60 and the wife is, we'll just say 25 to make her feel better, but a great teaching couple. And I loved listening to their experience back and forth. They walked away from several offers, and they just weren't ready to go to Central America, for example, for very low pay. Financially, they were probably going to wait a little bit longer and retire in the States before they ended up going overseas again. They had been overseas in the early 90s, right? And I was following them. I'm still communicating with them, and I hope that Gary and his wife, really, I think it's Jill. I want them to find a great school once they're ready to leave the States and once they're ready to retire, I think, and have a little bit more flexibility, I guess, to go overseas at a lower paying job at the right time, the right fit, the right time. And that'll happen for them. They were great people. She was looking at admin and he was looking at tech also.
So,
right?
If I understand you correctly, even people who hadn't been overseas before, it doesn't sound like this Gary and Jill had been overseas yet. Was
They
this
were
their
earlier
first?
in the 90s.
Oh,
Then they
okay.
were back, but
Okay.
they didn't find what they wanted, and they were okay with that. They had a good experience at the fair. And I had the overall idea that there were very few that just left frustrated, right? There were always going to be a couple of those. And
Yep.
since there were so few candidates this time, I didn't hear a lot about, just walking out the door. It's not for me, right? One guy from New York showed up, and it was very strange. He had like this. He was a elementary teacher from New York, from the Bronx, and he had a backpack with a with a purple like stuffed animal sticking out of his backpack. It was a strange
Well, that's
situation.
one way to stand
what
out.
a character! Yeah, that was his intent. He's like, I'm me, man. I'm going to show me. He was
Elton John star glasses, glittering.
what a character. He was. He would be a great. I'm sure he's a great elementary teacher. He does videos. He does green screen. Like during COVID, he was doing green screen science lessons with his puppets. So he had created like puppets, and they all had names. And he brought the main puppet with him in his backpack, I guess, to go over it with the schools, right, for online. And he kept bringing up the name of the puppet. I'm like, oh my God, this is a character. But that's what elementary kids
Now,
need,
We
right?
don't know about him, but those puppets got 3
Entertainment.
offers. Listen, we'll pay you double if you leave the guy behind.
Right. We'll take the puppet, but you need to
take the
stay here. Oh, he was a character. What a great guy to meet, though. I really enjoyed that. I don't know what happened to him. I think that he's actually returning to New York, to the Bronx, to teach and follow through with some things that he started. I don't think he's going overseas, which is too bad because I think a lot of these schools, stuffier schools, could certainly use
someone.
a real puppet guy, not
guy
a
with the
scary,
puppets.
not the scary puppet kind of guy, right? But the really
talented
entertaining
puppet guy.
Yes, he said he's not a ventriloquist, so he likes the green screening because he doesn't have to be on stage with the puppets.
Did you get
Very
a card?
strange.
Next time you get a business card from this guy because we either need to watch his videos or get him on one of these days.
I'm hoping that somebody listening to this was there with
if
me
you
at the
know
fair.
the puppet guy,
If
you know the puppet guy, could you please email the ITP
or
podcast
puppet
and
guy,
let us know?
if you're listening to this, puppet guy, have your little puppet reach out to us on ITP.
Oh, well, let's see. Tell the ITP crowd what you've decided, where you're at in your job search, where you're at in your career, what you're feeling.
Oh, let me tell you a fun story first, okay?
Is this the police story?
No, I have a custom story also, but one of the first stories I wanted to share with you was the one that I called you and told you about when it happened, and that's the online school I was mentioning
Oh, I
before.
thought you told that story.
I didn't tell the whole
You
story.
didn't tell the whole story. Finish that online school story. I'm sorry.
Well, the online school is the woman was based out of the school in Aruba that's sponsored by ISS.
Yes.
So ISS is trying out this new online platform school. And when I went to their presentation after the interview in the beginning, I went to her presentation and there was only 2 of us. Gary and I were the only 2 sitting in there. And then one of the guys from ISS, right? And she went through her whole spiel. And one of the important things, right, in case you haven't been to one of these fairs, one of the important things is the early days of the fair, schools have presentations with videos or with slideshows, and they stand in front of an audience, whoever's interested, for a half an hour. And they sell their school, right? So there's an audio, visual, speech selling point for their school. And I went into so many different ones. The Taiwan one was amazing. I want to go live there. But side note, but the online one was the one that caught me off guard, and I've never had this happen to me. And when I went into that job fair, it was just that presentation. It was just Gary and I in the audience, both of us interested in tech, both of us over 50. And the woman in front of us is just, passionate about this new online school. And she goes through the whole thing where they talk about the package, they talk about living there, which was nowhere, and all these other. So she reached out and told us her whole plan. And I swear to God, Ken, I raised my hand at the end, and I realized something. I laughed so hard, a big belly laugh, and she's like, calls on me, and I said, well, where am I going to live? She goes, but it's online. You can be based out of anywhere. And I said, but you're not understanding. My question is, where am I going to live? Do you offer housing? And she said, no. ISS is the one in charge of offering you the position, so you get paid by ISS, and you can do it from anywhere. And I was like, I'm 53. You want me to move back in with mom and dad? Right? I said, where do I go? Can I go to Aruba with you? You live in Aruba. Can I just go there? She's like, well, if you want to, but we don't offer anything.
We're not looking. We don't want you as our neighbor. We're not
She didn't
hiring
want
you to
anything to
live
do.
near us.
She didn't want me at all. She was like, I want you remotely, Greg, and I don't want to be near you. So,
What do you suppose a job like that pays? Is it comparable
oh,
to
I
a
asked her.
classroom?
$40,000 a year was the offer, straight across the board, no secret. They were offering 40K, but it's taxed in the U.S. because ISS is based out of the U.S.
Were they going to give you health care?
I got a basic health care package and the 40K, but the two big things, housing and tax-free, were not on the table.
So the
I couldn't
big
believe it.
two things that you look for as an
Well,
international teacher,
airfare, right?
air,
Three big things.
housing, tax-free money.
Right.
None of that was on the table.
No, because it was an online school, and I couldn't believe I was actually talking to him. I'm like, well, you should just go find, a non-working spouse for somebody at an international school that needs to supplement their income and do it that way. Don't talk to me. I would give up way too much. I'm in this to travel. I'm in this to be in a great school somewhere and travel the world at the same time. So that wasn't part of it. So that was my interview or my presentation story. I couldn't believe it. Oh,
I think
man.
it's funny that you raised your hand and you asked, where am I going to live? And she looked at you and said, I don't care. Okay, so now let's get down to it. What did you decide? The ITP listeners are on bated breath. They've been waiting almost an hour. They want to know, what did Greg the single guy decide?
Well, Greg the single guy is gonna. I'm a born again Aramcon, I guess you could say. I'm coming back to my. I'm gonna stay here in the desert for another couple of years and maybe go looking afterwards. I'll probably stay here for another 3.5 if possible. We have pretty much an open contract for renewal, and it's a good gig. I love my job here. I've started something with Makerspace. I'm gonna stay. So I did inform a couple schools and turned down a couple offers. It was a successful fair. I left in good graces with those people that I ended up talking to. I remember I had another hour-and-a-half talk with the guy from Marrakesh. He was new from the States into his position, first time overseas, and we talked for an hour-and-a-half after I told him I wasn't interested in his position offer.
So someone who was trying to break into the business, someone who has a little bit of experience, maybe on the adventurous side, Marrakesh is in Morocco. This would be a great fit for many of our listeners out there.
Oh, I agree with you. I think it was a great fair, not for me. I think it was a great fair for a lot of people. I think a lot of candidates, and I don't have access to that information.
Yes.
From the feeling that I got, the people that I talked to, they had a really good experience. And I do know, in fact, the Marrakesh, the one that I turned down, the school at least, I don't know about which positions they took, but a teaching couple that I had met at the fair were going overseas for their first time, a teaching couple, and they were hired by the Marrakesh head of school. So, and I remember watching the Super Bowl at the last minute with the husband, and the wife was back at home with their baby, back at the other hotel with their baby. But they were going overseas first time, and he was super excited. And I was excited. I'm excited for them because Marrakesh looked like a great package, and it was a really interesting school, what they had done with the elementary. And that head of school, his first name is Casey. I don't remember his last name. He was a great person to interview with. And I love these job fairs because you go face to face. I go with the person as much as anything. It's that personality. They need to sell themselves to me, and I need to sell myself to them. So when you meet a great leader that is passionate about the school, not just checking off the boxes, right? I've had interviews like with those, and you've had interviews like that too, right? Where you meet the head of the school, and they're just sort of like, yeah, we've got to go through the boxes, and you're like, where's the passion? But like this guy at the Marrakesh school was passionate about what he was doing there and leaving his mark, moving on to another school in the future, but really wanting to hire some great people for a place that he enjoyed working and sends his kids to, right? When you meet somebody that sends their kids to that school, the guy from Kazakhstan that I interviewed with, he has his kids at his school in QSI, and you can tell that is a great school because the leader wants to send his kids, is sending his kids through that system and at his own school.
When you interview with QSI, and our listeners will know that myself and Mrs. Cat spent
Quality
time.
Schools International,
Quality
right?
Schools International. We spent time there. They treated us very well, and we have great things to say about them. Were they hiring just for the one country? Did they have a list of countries they were looking for?
I love it you brought that up because I was standing there, and I'll just say their first names. One was Michelle, as a woman that was hiring for QSI, and at the table was Matt. And Matt and Michelle were sitting there. Matt was at the table, and Michelle came up to me, and I was standing behind two people in line to set up an interview with them, just a cold call. So they didn't know who I was. And she comes up to me, and she hands me this piece of paper, and she says, "Now, before you come and sit down and talk with Matt, I need you to understand that we only interview people that have a specific country that has a specific job opening for that school before you even sit down. Because if you're saying you want to go to a certain school, we don't have a position open, then we'll have to do this some other time and give time to other candidates." Because there's one or two people behind me. She hands me this piece of paper, and it was 2 pages of schools. It was like bullet pointed, almost outlined, of school names and positions for each school. So when she handed me this paper, I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, that's a menu. I'm like, okay, I'll take a Kazakhstan, I'll take a Moldova, once you hand me, all right, I'll take the other Kazakhstan too, and look, how about that grade 4 in Romania or something, whatever it was. And she started laughing. She said, just take a look at it and come back, and we'll sit down, maybe we'll set up an interview. And she asked me a little bit about what I was doing. So she was front loading while Matt was talking to people at the desk. She was in the line of people, 4 or 5 total, talking to us and sort of weeding out the non-possibilities just because there wasn't a position open or a country that they really wanted that wasn't on the list. Because they have so many schools. They have how many schools? 32?
23, 24, depending.
Like I said, 24. And it was really exciting. And I ended up interviewing with Matt, and that was probably a good 45 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And then I ended up doing a video interview with the school in Kazakhstan, and that's why I brought that up. So it was an exciting offer, and not an offer even. It was just an exciting interview cycle with them, and I have fond memories of them as a recruiting group. So I'm going to go back and look at QSI in the future.
Great.
Right?
Well, shout out to Dwayne Root. He was he made a special trip to come see me in the early days, and so I was very grateful for that. So shout out to you, Dwayne, who spent time in Yemen before I did. So.
Well, before you go to a job fair, like anybody listening to this, before you go to a job fair, reach out to people that you may know, even cold call some of the schools to see what you're really interested in. And then once you get to a fair, make connections. And your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. We had one guy just stop me, looked at my name tag and said, "Oh, you're there in Saudi. Oh, can you say hi to Chad for me?" It's like, what? He's like, "Yeah, we taught in Kuwait together," right?
Yep.
It was fantastic. I had to take a picture with it. I took a selfie with the guy and showed Chad the other day.
It's a small world out there.
Small world, and they're even smaller with these job fairs.
Well, I will tell you that this year with the job fair, my dream came true. From the very beginning, I wanted to keep the single guy here. I'm a little selfish, but I wanted to keep the single guy here. He's staying here, so my dream came true. Job fairs can make dreams come true.
Oh, that sounds so romantic, but it's not. It's a bromance more than anything, right?
Well, the Mrs. Cat has something to say about that.
Absolutely.
Let's hear about customs. You got a police story for us?
Oh, I love customs and police stories. I know we broadened out a little bit. Here's my customs story. Of all the countries that I could ever fly into, what's the one country that you would least expect any customs problem with?
UK, EU, Canada,
Correct.
Mexico.
USA. I fly home. Yeah, you missed that one, Ken.
Oh, that big one in the middle of North America.
So I have flown into so many places, right? And usually I'm expecting a mass of people, but I don't expect problems like you do in third world countries. I don't expect problems like in Indonesia. You show up and there's hundreds and hundreds. You wait for 3 hours at customs, and it's just because of their process. Well, I show up at Dulles Airport after a 14-hour flight, and that's my second flight. So I flew from here to Dubai, had a layover, got on a new plane, flew 14 straight hours. We fly into Dulles, And on the news, on the BBC News on the airplane, the news a half an hour as we're in our landing pattern, the BBC News carries a story about how Dulles Airport International Customs has been shut down because of system failure.
Oh, no.
4 international flights, we all landed at the same time at Dulles International.
And that's
Walked
that's 1,000 people right there on international
at least
flights.
we walked in. It was like an Airbus 380, right?
Oh,
that I
yes.
was on, and we flew in. We all go. So the air crew go through one line. The green card holders and residents of the U.S. go through another line, and any visiting people with visas go through another line, right, to get into the U.S. Well, there were 4 customs agents. 4 out of 50 stalls, 50 little appointment office, lanes. There were 4 open, and one of them, knowing our wonderful country, we take care of our wheelchair people so that the planes can keep landing. They only have a few wheelchairs for all of the flights.
Yes.
Well, they put all the wheelchairs in front of everybody else into one stall. So that left 3 stalls left. There was one for the international visa holders. There was one for the U.S. residents, and there was one for the crew. 3 hours, Kent.
You spent 3 hours
in line,
after
standing.
a 14-hour international flight. You're in the United States, and you're waiting 3 hours to enter.
No water, no nothing. There were bathrooms, of course. There were huge lines. It was fantastic. I loved it so much. I was scheduled to have lunch at noon, and I was about an hour taxi ride from the city. I did make it to my lunch, but we were there for 3 hours after a 14-hour flight. It was so bad it made BBC News. Right? People were just crazy.
That tops our 2-hour wait in UK and London. The Mrs. Cat and I had to spend. We missed a tour that we were scheduled for a couple years back because of the customs. But 3 hours in the U.S.
It was a little bit scary too, Ket, because when I walked up to the window, the guy looks at me, stamps it, and pushes me through.
And that was it.
It wasn't. There were no questions. What are you doing back in the U.S.? Where have you been? It was a little scary talking about security. I mean, you can crab all you want about our security systems and our TSA, but I am much more happy when I do have to wait for a certain reason, not just because they closed down 47 stalls, but maybe because they're being a little bit extra careful and asking more questions. That's a different story.
Yes.
But no, this was terrible, and it was just too much. I mean, I couldn't believe that. That's one of the worst stories of coming into the U.S. I've ever seen. I wish they had a huge American flag for us to see too, but they didn't have one. Right? Welcome back. Welcome to the USA. 3-hour wait. Oh, man.
Well, ITP crowd, this has been a special. This has been a special installment of the ITP. We didn't have a guest. We didn't have a specific theme. This was kind of an eyewitness report to the ISS Job Fair in Washington, D.C. that you just got back from maybe 4 days ago. And it's been a real treat having a chance to chat with you. Anything else you want to tell our listeners before we sign off?
Well, I just hope it was enlightening. And if you ever fly into Dulles, be prepared. I guess you can just reach out and you can always ask us on the ITP and send us some questions if you have specific ones. Buy my book.
I'll
make an edit to it later on. Go to a job fair. I really agree. I think that they're the best way to get a job. And next year, they're probably going to be back up to your 600 or 800 candidates. I think this is just a fluke year.
Well, we'll see all of you at a future job fair when maybe the single guy and the cat guy are both out there looking.
That's going to be a couple of years down the line, though, because I still love where I'm at. I'm very lucky to have this position, so now it's full force, steam ahead.
I don't know about you, but my manager keeps leaving job ads on my desk with one circle saying, I think you'd be good for this one, and this one.
Well, I'd like to say thank you to all of the people that were at the job fair. I reached out to and that were getting through that fair successfully, because it's not easy to do.
Well, and I'd like to say to Aura that yes, he is indeed 50 feet away from you at all times now. And again,
Show me in
if
Vietnam.
anyone knows the puppet guy from New York, give us a line. Thanks a lot, Greg. Thank you so much, single guy, for joining us today.
We'll see you next episode.
See you next episode.
That's so funny. Puppet guy. Oh, man. He's going to be reading, he's going to be hearing this. We're going to get these emails flooding in.